Hi, good morning, and good afternoon, good evening to those joining us online from other parts of the world. It's such a pleasure and privilege to be here and to be talking about the India Forum. I'm joined with my dear friend Arman from NCPDP, and then we have a couple of other colleagues who are going to be joining us online, Utsav, Nirat, Nidhi, and then Ankita. What we're hoping to do is ask each of our panelists to start off by giving us a little context, tell us a little bit about their work, and then sort of work our way backwards so that we can get a chance to engage on points that other panelists have raised during the conversation. But to just lay the context out, this is an important time, and in many ways we'd say that this is perhaps the time for the India Forum, because right now India has the presidency of the G20, right? So it's in a position of influence formally in ways that are different from what was happening earlier. In terms of what's happening in India, I think there's a big change that's afoot, right? We now have a formal program called the Accessible India Campaign, which is the first time that in all these years the nation has come up with a program focusing on persons with disabilities. We've had lots of other programs and legislations, etc. And Arman's going to cover some of that because NCPDP has been deeply, deeply involved in the work that got done there. So we have the legislative framework. We are looking at a lot of social change. I think the young are far more interested in social inclusion. I think they observe elements of exclusion very, very carefully, and they're getting mindful about it. So there's clearly change there. And then I think the adoption of technology, I think, is something that is absolutely mind-blowing, and it's scintillating to see the kind of changes that it's making. I'll take a couple of minutes to talk a little bit about the technology and the change that it can bring to the lives of those that are excluded, including persons with disabilities, right? We've got an incredible payments platform, for example. You have the ability to now order things, you have the ability to access information, etc., etc. And that's very fascinating. It's also very thrilling. At the same time, however, and I must say that I'm not a person with disability, but based on what I've learned from persons with disabilities, I think we have to be very, very mindful that as we create this new infrastructure and the environment that all of us engage with, we have to be mindful that we do not repeat and replicate the mistakes that we have made in the past with our hard and soft infrastructure. Right? Our infrastructure, the physical infrastructure, remains inaccessible for a very large number of persons with disabilities. And that's because of the historical reasons, et cetera, et cetera. Our soft infrastructure, which is the environment that we operate in at places of work, where we interact with our environments as consumers, as citizens, as customers, there are many, many challenges. And those challenges come from people not understanding the barriers that are present in our environment. Sometimes I would say that it's not even being aware that there are barriers. So my worry is that while we look at technology as a panacea, right, we normally talk about all the incredible change that it can bring. I think we have to be mindful that it has the risk of creating a different form of exclusion, right? And if we do not bake it in, right, and that is the most important element, like we are trying to do with our physical infrastructure, if you retrofit, if you ask me, it's retrograde, right? So you've got to bake it in when you're building solutions, whether in technology or social solutions, etc. I worry at the pace of change and our lack of understanding of barriers simply because we don't have users in the creation process. Right? There's a lot of talk about co-creation. We'll talk a little bit in the follow-on session about what's really happening in India from an innovation standpoint. But I can say, and I have colleagues on the panel who are going to talk about this, about the absence of persons with disabilities and their participation in the process. And I don't want to talk about the social political process, which is what we end up talking about most often. But I'm saying that I get to participate, people reach out to me about how to build products that work for me, right? And there are many ways that I can give feedback, et cetera, et cetera. When it comes to persons with disabilities and the barriers that they face, I think we are not moving fast enough, and we aren't doing enough. So I think the reason I'm saying all of this is because the tone of this panel is going to be very, very optimistic, right? We are fortunate that we have people that are delivering change with bare hands, if I could say, and I can see some colleagues sitting here right in front of us as well. But I think we may not be fully recognizing the risks of further exclusion that we are going to find ourselves leading to if we do not suitably prepare ourselves. The way this is going to flow is I'm going to request Arman and then Utsav and Nirat, Nidhi and Ankita in that order. And what we'd like to do is I'll introduce every speaker briefly because I'd request them to tell us a little bit about their work. But you can read up about them. All of them are super well known. They have lots of social profiles, etc. So I request them to tell us about the work that we don't get to hear enough about. Right? You get to hear only headline details, etc. I'm going to start with Arman, whom I've now known for a couple of years. I think the one thing about Arman, this was not supposed to be part of the formal introduction, is I think what you see is what you get. Right? And I think that's one of the pleasures of engaging with him. I can say that I've never had any hesitation being able to reach out to him to ask. And I know it will be both direct and effective. So for that, Arman, thank you, and I hope you will keep it that way. Yeah. Arman is now the executive director of NCPDP. So I think there's the static part, which is this. But I think the dynamic part is very few people remember him as an HR professional. That's not something that people know a lot about, right? So that's something that he has done, so he has deep understanding of that, right? He's worked with an organization prior to NCPDP that I'm super fond of, right? They work in Guwahati, and I'm sort of in admiration of the work that they do. So I think he knows what is really needed on the ground in that sense. He's, of course, been part of various government committees. He was part of the UNESCO editorial board, and, of course, has won many awards. But Arman, I mean, of course, we'd love to hear a little bit about you and your background. I just want to talk to you about the fact that as we build for the new India, right, and as we sort of we talked about the Discovery Awards and many other things, how do we make sure that we don't repeat the mistakes that we had? What's the voice of persons with disabilities?
Thank you, Shashaank, and things I forgot, you reminded me that things I used to do in the past, but that's what keeps you grounded. I think we should be very cognizant of the fact that 65% of the population in India are persons with disabilities. I mean, a person below the age of 35. And if you look at the way the government of India looks at the data around disability, if you look at 2% of that figure, can you imagine the size? And I can say it on record, it's criminal if you want to discriminate and make another generation of people with disability invisible. With young age being on a side, we're also looking at a high volume of population of people who will be elderly by 2050 and so on. I think one of the world's largest number of population of people who will be elderly and their need. What has happened, Shashaank, is that disability sector, people with disability has lost the seat on the table with the impact of the pandemic. We have lost the seat on table, and everybody has gone back to a charity and a welfare mode, where we are looking at a model where you are supposed to get social security from the government, which is very meager, and we have lost this ability to engage in a dialogue and to be more participatory in every policy is being made. There's so much of noise around disability across the globe, I would say, and particularly in India. I think it's a glass half full, and ATE technology, I use technology where I want to, and I don't use technology where I don't want to, and I think people with disability should have a choice. How much technology do they want to use? Why should I buy expensive wheelchairs and you don't fix your environment? I don't want to buy wheelchairs which can climb staircase. I want to buy wheelchairs which are easily available, easy to my pocket, and so on. One other thing which is kind of scary to me is the fact that 80 and technology is a lot to help people with disability. Sometimes it looks like that you're trying to fix people with disability with their problem or their disability. I don't see 80 which is coming up to fix the environment. You talked about, the historical mistakes that we have made. We visited some place yesterday evening. We could not get into a restaurant. We could not get into another meeting with dignity. This historical mistake cannot be an excuse to alienate another generation of disabled people. I think we have to be very cognizant. And technology, there is a need to bring focus on how do you fix environment, how do you fix products, how do you fix services, how do you fix infrastructure, your information sharing system, and so on. So I think there is a need that there is a focus on environment thing. Like, the pandemic has been a great example for all of us to understand that how disability became an afterthought. Nothing that, one of the examples you keep hearing about 1,000 times, that work from home is something which disabled people has been demanding for the last 20 years. When it hit the majority, it kind of was made a norm overnight. But that's not the point, A lot of people with disability lost jobs. People who worked in unorganized sector. How is technology helping with that? How are we keeping this discourse in the mainstream? So the discourse of disability cannot just be to fix disabled people. That needs to change a lot. And I think the absence of accurate and disaggregated data around disability, fails disabled people. What is not counted doesn't count. That's the point. I think all of us in the sector, all people, everybody who's doing into business or government or people with disability, civil society organizations, must keep data around disability. And I'd say from cradle to jail, I think you keep data of people with disability where they are, how they interact, and the kind of barriers they are facing. We have one of the strongest legislation in the world, I would say, the Rights of Persons with Disability Act, which NCPEDP, as you mentioned, we are India's leading organization, which is research-based advocacy on disability. And this is what we do full-time. And we have been instrumental in getting 2 legislation in 2 decades. I mean, how many countries would have that, I would bet on it, for that. We have one of the best law. We were instrumental in getting disability included in census, accessible elections. You talk about aviation, you talk about jobs in private sector. We started a discourse, and we have supported all the players who'd come. I think Deborah was speaking earlier, talked about how we become competitive sometimes, how we need to collaborate, how we need to understand that there is so much that is need to be done. You talked about my previous organization, the North, which is in the northeast of the country, remote. Each person with disability is unique. Each one of them have a different need. So there is so much that is need to be done. And I cited this example of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act, one of the strongest legislation you see in the world. We take pride in that legislation. It talks about making all infrastructure, products, services accessible for people with disabilities within 5 years of this act being passed. 17th of June 2022, we have crossed that timeline. So if there is no compliance, what penal provisions are there? Do we stop businesses? Do we break down buildings? Or what is the way forward? I think that clarity needs to be there. We just can't be sitting on the fence. If you mean disabled people are people first, if you consider them to be a part of the, a part of a citizen, if they're free, then I think these things cannot be any gray areas. It's either there or not there. So I think for us, as people with disability, as organizations working for people with disability, we need to have this clarity. How much do you let go? What is non-negotiable and what is that you keep it on a back burner and so on? Right.
Thank you, Arman. I'm going to not let you go too cheaply. So I'm going to ask you to tell us, how do we make sure that persons with disabilities have a seat on the table, right? I mean, we've got to right that wrong when we come back, perhaps. But I think, if I can just summarize, I think zero acceptance of barriers. I think, so while zero barriers is a great pursuit, I think we have to find a way to build in this whole idea of zero acceptance of barriers in our environment. We were talking yesterday, and Arman was talking about how in our own environments, right, in our own in our offices, in the way we that engage, etc., there are barriers that we learn to live with, and that's why it's okay to find them in your society as well. Since we're talking about environments, I'm going to now invite Utsav. Can we have Utsav on screen, please? He's joining us from India. Utsav is part of the National Institute of Urban Affairs. And I'm going to request him to tell us a little bit about his work, but more importantly about what can we do to make sure that the work that he does, which is around building safe and inclusive Indian cities, right? And I want him to sort of put the lens that Arman talked about. How do we make sure that they are not just safe and inclusive for those that we count, but even those that are currently not being counted? Utsav, he's worked with lots of organizations. I'm going to let him tell us a little bit because he's a very important influencer in the scheme of things in India because, the guidelines that they are putting together, et cetera, and it's going to have immense ramifications for everybody in the country. Utsav, just, as you tell us about your work, I was just reading a report about by the time, when you look at 2050, right, some 60% plus of the construction that you would see then has yet to be done, right? So tell us a little bit about how do we make sure that we don't do what we've done in the past and let barriers remain.
Thank you, Shashaank. First of all, I think speaking right after Arman is a tall order in itself. I mean, he sets very high standards for the quality of work that he does and the contribution that he has had to the sector so far and the work that he does on a day-to-day basis. But being respectful of the time, Shashaank, I'm going to stick to about 3 to 4 minutes to talk about who I am, what do I represent, and the work that we're currently doing. And maybe even try to address the question that you had in mind, that how do we create things or how do we create infrastructures and services in cities that are for everyone, and how do we not, sort of don't get into the cycle of making mistakes and having to correct them. So you say something around retrofitting is retrograde. I completely agree with you. I think that perfectly summarizes our state of affairs with the Indian cities. We have been retrofitting for the longest time, but we'll get into it in some time. Who we are, I represent an organization called the National Institute of Urban Affairs. In short, it's NIUA. So National Institute of Urban Affairs is a policy think tank. It works focused on urban issues. We have been existing in the realm for about 45, 46 years now. And our domain of work is to work with the cities to improve their capacity, to deploy projects and to deploy missions and schemes from Government of India, and to also improve their capabilities in diverse areas. And one of them is inclusion, or social inclusion, and inclusion in the built form. The work that I do at NIUA is, so Shashaank, as you mentioned, the project that I lead is called the Building Accessible, Safe, Inclusive Indian Cities. So it's a program that has been functioning for about 3-4 years now. We've been working with a number of cities in India to understand, first of all, what does inclusion mean to them? And secondly, bring in the lens of universal access and universal design into the urban planning process. And since I am at the word of universal design, I think partly that also answers your initial questions, Shashaank. How do we create infrastructure which is compliant, which is for everyone? Because if you think about inclusion, and if you keep focusing on inclusion being only a necessary aspect of life for a person with disability, then we are setting the wrong precedents. What is inclusive and whatever is universal in nature will benefit everyone. Arman focused on the point that we are an aging population, right? So we're going to have a large section of the population above the cutoff age of, let's say, 50 or 60 years of old, and we are looking at barely a few decades for that to happen. And we're also looking at a major shift in the way the population dynamics are fluctuating in India. We're going to have over 70% of the population living in the cities, and which implies a greater sort of burden on the resources, And that also means that we also need to ensure that the human capital loss is at a minimum. We need all hands on board to ensure that resources are used in an intelligent manner. And what we create is fundamentally for everyone. Now, Shashaank, you also talked about India's current unique position that it is in with the G20 presidency and the kind of ramification that it comes with. I think the slogan for G20 under India's presidency is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. So it loosely translates to the world is a family. While family stands for love, compassion, but I think inherently it also means inclusion, right? So a family literally treats everyone, no matter what your differences are, as an equal. And that's the kind of precedence that we need to sort of set for ourselves, whether we talk about urban development, whether we talk about infrastructural development, whether we talk about technology, planning, advocacy, or getting people on important places to have representation. So Aman talked about participatory and representative in nature, and I absolutely agree with him. The more and more you go into the stratas of the society, you see the less and less representation from gender minorities and persons with disability and all kinds of marginalized groups. And I think that needs to change. We need to create cities. Let me rephrase that. We need to co-create cities with people who we understand as citizens. And literally everyone falls into that category. So there is no reason to not include persons with disability or other minority groups. On that note, Shashaank, I would also like to propose, with so many people in the room and so many people joining us virtually, I think there's so many different 20s that we're currently doing under the G20 presidency. We're talking about urban 20, we're talking about youth 20, we're talking about women 20, we're talking about civil society 20, all kinds of 20, right? So why not talk about an inclusion 20? A Vision 2020 agenda with everything inclusive, right? So we're talking about infrastructure, spaces, design, technology, planning, investments, innovations, all kinds of aspects that makes up our day-to-day lives with the pretense of inclusion added to it. And I think the most important aspect to take away, I think what we have understood from our work in the past few years is that it is important to bring the ecosystem together. The problem solving just from one lens, which is either from the lens of government or from the lens of civil society or from the lens of business, doesn't necessarily work, because this is not a problem. It is an aspect of everyday life that needs to be resolved. And that can only be resolved when we have everyone on the board and everyone thinking collectively. And I think I was fortunate to hear Deborah from the previous session, and she talked about competitiveness. I completely agree. It is about cooperation and collaboration, and less about competition. So she's totally on point with that particular aspect of the conversation at the moment, and just to sort of end my piece of 7 minutes that I have, is that I would like to totally focus on the fact of universal design, universality of product design, planning, architecture, in terms of creating new cities. That has to be the motto. It's not just about inclusion, it's about universal design and universal form of inclusion. It's meant for everyone. You see Apples and the Googles of the world creating products that are for everyone from the ground up. And that eventually benefits everyone. It may be you, me, or anyone else. It's not just for a person with disability. We all benefit from it. And that's the kind of mentality, and that's the kind of approach that we need to bring to urban design and planning. I'll take a pause here. Shashaank, back to you.
Thanks so much, Utsav. I think when we come back, I'm going to definitely ask you to talk a little bit about the cities versus town versus villages, right? So, while we work on making places inclusive, we just want to make sure that not some other parts are not being left out, as we've been sort of talking, and that seems to be the trend that we're worried about. I want to now bring in Nirat. Nirat Bhatnagar is a partner at Dalberg, which is one of the world's best consulting companies. What I'm really fond of is that he's the founder of Belong, right? That's, I think, the part that he and I connect most about, and I, of course, get a lot to learn from him around the work that they do. He's been working a lot on sort of finding ways to crowd in capital. So there's blended finance, and there's all kinds of other stuff that he's been working on. So, Nirat, can I just ask you to tell us a little bit about both your work in sort of, crowding in capital that you've been doing both at Dalberg and Belong, and give us a little bit background about Belong in particular. And then I have two sort of questions for you to consider answering. That, there's sort of tens, hundreds, depending on who you're talking to, millions and billions of dollars that are going on the bottom billion or whoever else is being left out, right? So, what about disability? Where is that getting counted, right? Because all persons with disabilities come from different economic strata, et cetera, right? So, is there a need to do something separately, or are we sort of, creating structures that, may not be able to bring the kind of capital that's required? There's very little, next to no social capital. Thankfully, we have Ankita who will talk about that a little bit. And then, your thoughts on, I know you've been involved a little bit with 80 solutions, et cetera. So Nirat, would you like to tell us a little bit about that before we go
on? Thank you, Shashaank. Thanks very much for the introduction, and thank you, Zero Project, for having me here. It's a real pleasure to be on the same panel as so many of you who've done incredible work in this space. I'll maybe take a couple of minutes just to talk you through my background and why this is of deep interest to me, and maybe I can offer a couple of perspectives that might be helpful. So I'm a partner at Dalberg. Dalberg is a global advisory firm focused on impact. We work with a lot of clients in Asia, in Africa, in Latin America, even Europe and the US on different development questions across different topic areas. So healthcare, education, water sanitation, cities. And one of the things that, one of the kinds of problem statements that we work on is how do you actually get in more capital for these problems, right? How do you make sure that there's enough money coming into, let's say, agriculture or education, healthcare? I'd been doing that for several years now, but about 3 years ago, I started the social venture called Belong, which focuses more on intersectional inclusion within developments. So how do you make development topics more inclusive for people with different identities, people with disabilities, people with marginalized genders, sexuality, race, religion, and so on. And the answer to your question, Shashaank, on why don't we have enough capital for, let's say, disability innovation, the answer to that is somewhat tied to why I felt the need to even create something like Belong. So if you look at historically, if you look at the evolution of the development sector over the last 100, 115 years, that formal philanthropy, formal development has existed. It's really interesting to note that the frame that has been adopted, right, by the early philanthropic efforts, let's say in the early 20th century, even let's say post-World War II, all of these large institutions that got formed, the World Banks and the UN agencies, the fundamental framing really has been the money framing, right? So if people are poor, then a lot of things follow from that. They don't get good nutrition, good healthcare, good education, etc. And let's solve for that. So that's really been the fundamental framing in the development sector in the last 100 odd years. I think about 20, 25 years ago when you had C.K. Prahlad, and he really popularized this idea of there being business models in this space, right? So the whole thing about the bottom of the pyramid, that there's an opportunity at the bottom of the pyramid. People might not have money, but there's still really good models to actually bring them goods and services. So that sort of sparked the second, I would say, revolution. So you now have a lot of social ventures that try and get things like financial services or healthcare or education to the bottom of the economic pyramid. And both of these things work in parallel right now, right? You've got, let's say, this a lot of public sector effort, a lot of philanthropic effort on the bottom billion, and you've got a lot of even social enterprise and social sector impact investor kind of focus on the economic value in this bottom billion. So, but what's sort of not been thought of as much or nearly as much is the question of identity, right? So how does somebody's identity in terms of, let's say, their disability, their race, their caste, their gender, how do those end up becoming huge barriers to their experience in life? And what kind of activity is needed to solve for that, right? So over the last year or so, I've been calling that the side of the pyramid. So the base of the economic pyramid is one thing, but the side of the pyramid is the other thing, right? Which is really, really important to look at. And if you sort of use that frame, it becomes very obvious what's really going on. Why does disability as a sector not have enough funding coming into it? And I'd say there are, just before I sort of come to the reasons and possible solutions, over the last year or so, Belong and Dalberg, we've been doing a fair bit of research on disability and mental health, disability and the food ecosystem, even disability and product innovation. So that's really the vantage point that I have, that I'm sort of sharing these perspectives from. The first thing that I think is needed is to really break some myths about how big this space is and how investable this space is. There are lots and lots of what are called type 2 errors or false negative errors in the estimation of how large this problem really is. And when you have different kinds of investors and funders deciding which problem to fund, we found at Dalberg that they often underestimate the disability sector. There's a big type 2 error. There's a false negative. They underestimate this thing and don't invest in it. Second is that they actually think about this as a glass half empty. There's a lot of I think there's a real need to point to the economic opportunity in the disability ecosystem, because many of these innovations, many of these business models actually are net positive for investment. If not purely commercial returns, you can actually get meaningful sub-commercial returns if you have interesting financing structures. So that's the second thing. I think there needs to be, one needs to de-average disability innovation as a space and think about almost different archetypes where innovation is needed. So there's an archetype for the disability innovation space where it's really in the consumer space, right? So there's a lot of, let's say, assistive technology that individuals make decisions around. Then there's some decisions that get taken by institutions. So let's say schools and universities and companies. And then finally, there's public kind of decisions. And the economics of most of these things are fairly different. The way financing needs to show up in each of these things is different. So I think a lot of de-averaging is required. But the good news is that many of these are actually cost positive. So if you do a cost curve analysis, many of them actually will pay for themselves. That's the kind of financing piece. I think a lot of myth busting, a lot of very targeted kind of intelligence, a lot of and we need a lot of coordinated, I think, communication in the sector to get funding within the space. We work with clients across other sectors, not disability. And I think what ends up happening is to crowd in money. It's really a 3 to 5 to 7 year journey where the landscape of where funding is needed, what kind of financing instruments are needed to be deployed. You sort of build that common vocabulary in all the actors. Then there's a lot of kind of evangelizing of the need, and then there's you have to have a lot of events and screenings and get people interested, and then sort of make the right kind of investor to the right kind of problem. I think we still need to go through that journey within India, at least. From what little I sort of have seen, the financing question for disability sometimes gets collapsed into two very simple binaries, right? Either it's a development kind of philanthropic problem, or it's a public problem, right? And then there's not enough nuance in the way financing is being thought about for disability. I think the last point I'll make before I pass it back to you, Shashaank, is that in addition to finance and these kinds of analysis and market intelligence, what's really needed is, I think, building on what Arman also said, I think we need a lot of people from the ecosystem to actually show up in where these funding decisions are getting taken, and also where let's say products and programs and services are being designed, right? So one of the things that we're trying to do through Belong is to actually, and Dalberg, is to actually try and promote the inclusion of people with lived experience in those decision-making settings. So how do you make sure that, let's say, impact investors have a council which have people with the lived experience of different disabilities, and that almost becomes a screen through which they evaluate investments, right? Similarly for other kind of investors also. Similarly, when you have products or programs or services being designed by large companies or even tech for good kind of organizations, how do you make sure that they have access to these to an advisory panel with lived experience, so that you bake in some of these principles from grounds up, and you don't have to retrofit because that's really expensive. So I'll stop now. I have to sort of take questions as we proceed. Back to you, Shashaank.
Thanks, Nirat. I'm going to come back to you, but I think your conversation provoked me to think about two things. And one of them briefly Arman and I talked about, right? I think, the importance of the seat at the table, right? And like Nirat was saying, that it's important for persons with disabilities to show up in the right places. And I think one of the struggles philosophically is that we won't allow them to, right? So for example, I don't know how many financing conversations Arman is getting invited to, but they're very, very few. I mean, I would imagine they're negligible.
None.
Yeah. So I think, and then related to that, and I'll give you a little while to think about that when we come back on our way back on this conversation, Nirat, is, people like you are sort of very strong influencers, right? People look to you, funders, investors, they look to you for guidance. And I wonder whether the exclusionary processes continue because we design whatever we do without including persons with disabilities. So I think the challenge is that you cannot design a what-and solution for persons with disabilities, the universality that Utsav spoke about, right? So I think with every single design that doesn't include or is not universal enough, I think we are perpetuating exclusion. And I'd like you to tell us, what is it that you think influencers like you can do on our way back? Like I said, we are sort of coming back, but I'm just going to now go quickly to Nidhi. She is from Nasscom Foundation. Nasscom Foundation has to be one of the most, how should I say, not powerful, but one of the most influential organizations that people don't know about, right? So Nasscom is and I'll let Nidhi talk a little bit about that, but people know about Nasscom as the organization for tech companies in India. Very few people who should know about the foundation itself. Very, very few people, even amongst those, recognize the role that the foundation has played to get disability inclusion going. I've had the good fortune of watching a little bit from the sidelines of the work that they have done, but the grave misfortune of seeing how difficult it is, right? Because it's very easy for me to say, listen, Nidhi, I think it's, you have everybody's number, they're talking to you. Why don't you call them and tell them that they should do A, B, and C? But like I said, I've also seen the misfortune of, so much of energy and effort, and yet things taking much longer. But I must say, to Nasscom Foundation's credit, they are probably the first people that most tech companies in India go to when it comes to skilling-related solutions, etc. And they've had a disproportionately positive influence, I think, in that area of work. Unfortunately, not much is known about it, Nidhi. So I'm going to request you to tell us a little bit about that. And of course, I think the other question is about what is it that participants or members of Nasscom could be doing to bring energy to the area of innovation around disability inclusion. So if you can link it to a little bit work that the foundation is doing and then how you're influencing members of Nasscom, really that would be nice.
Sure. Thanks, Shashaank. Firstly, I think it's a pleasure to be on this panel, and my loss that I'm not there in person to meet everyone. I think I'll pick up from the mention about seat on the table, right? And that is somewhere our strength is, right? So it's a lot about acceptance awareness, giving the right information to the right people, and that's what we do. Since we represent the tech industry, which is one of the largest industry in the world and in India, and this is the industry which employs the second largest number of people with disability in India. So our job actually is to ensure that when the design thinking happens, when the thinking happens, it is right from the beginning and not a thing as a afterthought. And one of the examples, before I talk a little bit about Nasscom Foundation, I would do is that we also, while we work with the bigger companies, we also work with SMEs, small and medium entrepreneurs. And what we are trying to do is sensitize them because they're still in the beginning of the journey. We work with a lot with the startups, and we again sensitize them when they are doing their whole design thinking. And we try and make them from different parts of inclusion, we sensitize them. We at Nasscom Foundation, we have witnessed the transformative power of technology for almost 20 years now. And as a part of Nasscom ecosystem, which is the industry body representing the tech industry, we are the only nonprofit organization in India which represents a neutral nonprofit organization. We play a very balancing role out here, which represents the Indian tech industry. And our whole philosophy is rooted into two parts. One is tech for good. One of you mentioned about it, and others is inclusion for all. Because while we are talking about technology, it has to be completely inclusive. Arman spoke about, technology can lead to exclusion. So our whole agenda is to make sure that while we're working on anything on tech for good, it has to have a completely inclusive side to it. It has to be very consciously inclusive. And our whole agenda, our whole efforts is very, very focused on creating access and opportunities who need it the most. And of course, one of the key sectors is people with disability. And one of the ways that we do this is, because inclusion is one of our primary agenda, we do it through a lot of awareness, engaging with decision makers, a lot of sensitization, summits, discussions, papers, whatever really helps, and also a lot of sharing of good practices. Because I do come across a lot of people from the industry who do have an intent, they just don't know how to go about it. And they don't know how to start. They sometimes don't get the right inputs. So we try and see that how we can make sure that it is a overall part of the business thinking. And what definitely we really do advocate is that whether it is about inclusion or anything when it comes to giving back, it is not about charity, right? It is about business. So we try and work with a lot of corporates on thinking it has to be from the business purpose, and how working on technology or disability or integrating the two in the industry, whether it comes from employing people, making technology available, or spending on technology, right, as their focus. We do focus a lot on making these companies believe that, understand that we try and base it on some data, that how technology can, and disability and assistive technology can actually help in terms of the business purpose if there is an investment on that. And I think what a lot of companies, you asked Shashaank the question that what can the industry do? Small steps, I do agree there's a long way to go. But I would say that the tech industry is in a way a trailblazer in terms of investing into the sector. A huge gap in a country like India. But a little bit, yeah, there is a need for, more capital, which will help it in terms of reaching the last mile. Because even when right now we talk about disability, a lot of conversations are very, very limited to urban areas, right? A lot of these technology that we talk about is not at scale, which can go to the last mile. So there is a huge need, again, sensitization, the willing to invest into technology. We are in a country where I think, from what I understand, 70% of our disabled population lives in rural area. And what I see is a lot of investment and a lot of awareness is more to urban areas. So there is a need for uh, everybody to align to the need of what is needed in the urban areas. We're talking about accessibility, we're talking about technology, but I don't know how much this is going towards the rural area, right? So to make it a real success, and it has to be that whatever technology investment, everything we are doing, it has to, in a country like India, it has to have a lot of focus on rural India. And I do see many companies coming forward, whether from an employability point of view. You mentioned skilling. Yes, we do a lot of skilling, and not too many people know that, but we always have a small percentage, like a 5%, which we say it is on all skilling programs for people with disability. We ensure that we are doing that, and we use technology for that, because access can sometimes be a problem, right? And so our overall goal is definitely to ensure that no one is left behind. We try and work on technology which is making it all inclusive and not exclusive.
Thank you, Nidhi. So what we're going to do is we're going to speak to Ankita now, who's going to tell us about something completely different, the world of startups and disability inclusion and the ecosystem, etc. But on our way back, I think we're going to make it a little provocative. If Arman's here and we don't do that, we would have wasted a good opportunity. So what I'm going to do is, Nidhi, I'm going to come back to you to tell us about, compliance with law, for example, right? Historically, until maybe 17 June last year, it was, there was a timeline and whatever else. So I think with the largest employer set, et cetera. So I'm going to let you think about that a little bit while I come back on that. I think there's maybe some angle there that we should be thinking about as well. I'm just going to now welcome Ankita. Welcome, Ankita. Thank you so much for joining us. She's part of Social Alpha. It's a very, very interesting organization. I'm going to just restrict our conversation to the work that they do in and around disability inclusion. But they take a very different approach. They've realized that there are lots of bright young people who want to find different ways of doing things and build things ground up. And Social Alpha is inclusive in that they have a track for disability inclusion / assistive tech. My questions to you, Ankita, are, is there really an ecosystem of any sort? Or are you one of the lone rangers in and around that? Because, so there's this bright young person and they want to do something, right? And then they get to, let's say, run into you or one or two others that I happen to know of. And then what happens, right? Tell us a little bit about what the ecosystem is like, what's really going on out there.
Thanks, Shashaank. Maybe, as you said, when talking about the ecosystem as such, I mean, let me start by saying that, we're by no means the lone rangers. Yes, we could do with a lot of people on board, but I think there are enough and a lot of people. We have quite a few decks on hand who are very, very committed. Let me tell you a little bit about how the assistive technology ecosystem works, or what have we seen in our brief 4 to 5 years by being investors and venture developers in this ecosystem. Largely, we've seen innovators that come to us will come because they have seen somebody very close to them or themselves have suffered from disability. So we've seen very few people, I would say it's as low as 20% people who's actually seen disability and said that, okay, maybe I should do something about it. Only after a friend has suffered an accident, or somebody in the family has gone through, is experiencing a development disability, is when they start thinking about, can I create a solution for this? And this is typically out of frustration because they've gone everywhere around looking for a solution and they haven't found one. So as they say, necessity is the mother of invention. I think it starts there. Post that, what happens is, first is to sort of understand that, is this need really just my need, or is there a larger population suffering from this need? And so to say, you can say, yes, guys, this is a very big problem, but everybody experiences disability in a certain way. So to sort of generalize that, I'll create this product for my child or for a friend of mine, I'll create a crutch, and that will be a better crutch, and it'll sort of enhance the experience of everybody who is going to use a crutch, is probably not true. It's probably a good generalization because everybody who uses a crutch will have some common complaints, but it's probably not a good generalization. So there comes, they will create a prototype, and then they will try and work with a few people. They will realize that, we do have some problems, maybe we need to solve these. And then they realize that a couple of people have some unique problems that they want to solve. And basically, every innovator who starts out in this ecosystem feels that, they have to reinvent the wheel. And this is for a couple of reasons. I mean, somebody else spoke about, I think Arman spoke about data. We don't have a centralized data of, so if I want to understand how many people, say in my area, are experiencing locomotor disability, or even state-wise are experiencing locomotor disability, I probably don't have an idea, right? I think last year WHO did a survey of, how is assistive technology adopted in the country, and they realized that almost 90% of assistive aids which were distributed were abandoned because they were not of any use to the person using them. And be it by philanthropy or be it by, be it they were bought by these individuals, this is colossal waste of money. And this has been going on for a while now, right? So yes, I think the innovator generally, we've seen that most 80 innovators get disappointed at this, at this stage, and this is that biggest value of death, as you call it, that they experience. Uh, Typically the ones who survive this have to go through a regulatory pathway, and they want to make sure that the product is safe and will be used by everybody. They will typically want to partner with a rehabilitative organization or a hospital. They'll want a doctor to sort of attest to the safety and go through a regulatory process to make sure that they can sell the product. Post this, and we've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come to this stage as well, and post this comes comes a larger problem to understand who are my users, how do I get there, and how do I convince them that this is a superior product to what you're using. And let me give you an example. When you go to buy a phone in the market, you know that you want a phone, and you are evaluating out of, say, 10 phones to understand which is the phone which is best suited for you. But if somebody is experiencing an upper body, an upper body amputation and has no hands, and when I go to them with a product saying that here is a clicker that you can operate with your foot to use your computer, they will be like, first of all, I don't know if this product exists. Second, I don't know if I really need to use a computer, because all my life somebody has done something, the work for me, and I haven't been empowered to use the computer, so I don't see value in investing in something like this. Also, the third thing is, if I really want this product, who will pay for it, right? So there's a bunch of, as an entrepreneur, I mean, we can all talk at a policy level saying that we need to be inclusive, etc. But when it comes to an entrepreneur, their bread and butter depends on whether somebody will buy their product or not. So this is another value of debt that we see, that good products exist in the market, but then the companies sort of just don't end up, going beyond their first 100 or first 200 users. Having said that, we've seen a lot of companies from India succeed. So let me bring a little bit about how Social Alpha intervenes in this stage. Basically, our idea is to help entrepreneurs start from a prototype stage, like basically at the lab stage, and help them and handhold them to their commercialization journey. In 80, typically, we also work with them towards commercialization, help them get their first 1,000 consumers. We do that by a couple of financing mechanisms, a couple of marketing, mentoring, all of that. I think in the past 4 years, we've evaluated close to 600 startups. I think for that alone is a very encouraging number for us. It's very encouraging for us that entrepreneurs exist, people are there to solve the problem. We supported them in different ways through dilutive and non-dilutive capital throughout their journey, be it grants to create prototypes, be it creating a market access fund for them to commercialize their product, give discounts, reach out to their users. Our idea is that we want to bet on the entrepreneur who wants to solve the problem and who wants to make money out of it. The idea is also to empower persons with disability to create demand, to generate demand, to empower them to demand for what they want and what kind of device do they want. As Arman said, he should be in charge of what he should want and what he should not want. This is our small step in contributing to the process, in contributing to the mission of inclusion. I'm going to take a pause here and see if you have any questions, Shashaank.
Yeah, just one quick question. Like I said, we intend to hopefully be a little provocative. In this process, right, do persons with disabilities have a seat on the table? And of course, is it participatory, or, how does that work?
There's no way somebody can create a product which will work without having a person with disability try it. So a very simple thing, if I want to create a product for somebody uh, who is say visually impaired, without their feedback, I'm not even making a prototype. So, in fact, entrepreneurs constantly are in touch, especially we ensure that they are, because we don't want to invest money, time, as well as effort from the ecosystem and experts to get to a stage where you are in the market and you realize the user doesn't need your product. So, in fact, at every stage we encourage our entrepreneurs to speak to as many users as possible, and I know that I've troubled a bunch of you who are on the panel today, and some people who've joined online as well, to get a lot of feedback on our products, be it at any stage. So I think that's non-negotiable for us.
Thank you. And is there a specific ask that you would have of the other panelists? Because you can't create an ecosystem by just yourself, right? And we fortunately have people from different backgrounds. Is there a particular ask you have of them?
Absolutely. I think in terms of whenever we have entrepreneurs, it'd be great if I could pull you guys in for maybe somebody like Utsav, if somebody is trying to do, create inclusive spaces. Of course, the Nasscom Foundation works with startups. We'd love to sort of understand if we can help in any way and collaborate. We definitely rely on Arman's guidance, and I know we've reached out to you as well, Shashaank. So thank you so much for it. And we'll, of course, reach out to Nirat, and we'd love to see what he's doing with Belong as well. Thanks for that, Shashaank.
Thank you. Nidhi, I'm just going to come to you now. We have about, 10 odd minutes, so it's going to be just a minute and change for each. But Nidhi, I'd like to hear from you about, what Nasscom Foundation could be doing around encouraging their members to be compliant with law and to remove barriers and provide reasonable accommodations. After that, Nirat, about the advisory that you do at Dalberg, and if there's a way that you can integrate disability in that. So while you think about that, Nidhi, would you like to tell us a little bit about how we can improve compliance?
So I think everything, of course, compliance is a lot about government enforcing it. But that's one side of it. But then, of course, there has to be, and which the government has tried to enforce, but we know where the state that it is in. But there's also about one is willingness, and willingness, as what I mentioned, I'm just going to repeat. It's very easy to convince somebody when you link it to their business purpose, right? And I think there's a lot of work needed, and just one or two organizations can't do it. Where there is a need, and I'll just repeat myself, is about a lot of awareness, a sensitization about why they should be compliant, right? I'm just going to go on a different note to, I don't know, it's worked. I know it's not worked in everyone's favor. Everything has not worked in everyone's favor, but even this India CSR law, the moment it became mandatory, you had corporates coming out and giving money, which was not happening, right? Do we need something like that, right? Do we need? I don't know. It's a controversial question out here. That do we need to make it? Do we need to have higher penalties, right? But us as Nasscom Foundation, which is a part of their tech industry ecosystem, I think our effort, and we need to do much more, I would say, is in terms of sensitization, also in terms of a lot of recognition and awards, right? That sometimes do help, because when you are, especially for a lot of companies, when you are seen and recognized that this particular company is contributing in a certain way or is compliant, there is and it has to come from a body which is, which is worth in terms of the branding or recognition and all of that, along with the government alignment. So I think there's a lot of, we can, there can always be more penalties and, government pushing it, but it has to be a lot of that ownership from the industry, that there has to be, it has to come from the top. There has to be more and more leaders out here, the CEOs, who have to say, it's my agenda, right? We are seeing a progress in some of the companies in gender, because some of the CEOs took it as their agenda, right? Similarly, for people with disability, it has to be the CEO's agenda, not the HR managers or the DNI head's agenda, right? So unless all of that happen, and that's what we are trying to do. And the one global inclusion summit that we do on an annual basis, where we have delegates from different countries, industries within India, outside, speakers, that's the whole agenda. that can we see the leaders giving a commitment? Can they be made more aware? Can they make sure that they see why it doesn't need to be penalty based, but it has to be more in terms of who will link it to their purpose, link it to their business. And I think so, end of it, a lot of more awareness, sensitization, and I think we as a sector need to come together. I think we all work, my favorite line is we work on silos, including Nasscom Foundation. I'm not saying that we try and bring in a lot of organizations together, right? But we all work in silos. And we need a common voice. We need to support each other and not, what was said earlier, compete with each other, right? So a lot of that is what is needed. And we're taking steps around it, but yeah, even Nasscom Foundation needs to quicken its pace.
Yeah, thanks, Nidhi. So, I'm going to speak like a citizen, and I think it's not unfair to expect as a citizen for all organizations to be simply compliant. That's about it, just the baseline compliance, right? And I think I can at least say only for myself that because of the kind of work that the IT industry and then the IT BPM industry has done over the years, I think there's expectation that they will lead, right? We've seen them lead in so many different ways, in other forms of inclusion, in delivering efficiency, in creating business models where none existed. Right? So I think there is that sort of expectation that this is the bare minimum. There was a reasonable amount of time that was provided, and we seem to be falling short. So, yeah, I think as a citizen, I'm super proud of the IT industry and what it has done to make our country proud. But on this one, I think they've sort of not lived up to what one would have thought, because they could have really led. But I hope it'll happen soon. Of course,
Shashaank, just to add to that, I think we all need to take that how we are taking for net zero. I think the industry needs to take target for disability also, right? Yeah. So without the targets, it will not happen.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much, Nidhi. Nirat, I'm going to come to you to tell us a little bit about, your position of influence with what is happening, and how do each of these investors think about whether it's investing or programming to become disability inclusive. And post that, Utsav, I'll come to you about, what Inclusion 20 could potentially look like, etc. But Nirat, over to you first.
Thanks, Shashaank. Three quick things. So the fundamental premise that we're working with is that good intentions don't scale. You need processes and platforms to really to scale up change, right? So you need that. Just intentions and willpower of some good, well-meaning people is not enough. So the first thing we're trying to do systematically is to create that seat at the table. There's a platform called Belong Circle, and Dalberg's been using it. The idea is that there are multiple kind of investment decisions, there are multiple, let's say, advisory decisions, there are multiple, let's say, journalists who speak to sources. So through this platform, we're trying to make sure that people, experts with that lived experience, show up as contributors to that decision, right? So one very tangible thing would be to work with some of the people on the panel and even other people in the Zero project ecosystem to make sure that experts with the lived experience of disability are showing up in investment decisions, in consulting decisions, policy advisory decisions, and so on. That's one very tangible thing. The second tangible thing we are doing is to try and put together a program called Inclusive Products Innovation Program. And the idea is we work with product managers in different tech companies to make sure that those products are accessible. There's some discussions we're having with a bunch of people already. It'll be good to actually foster partnerships, let's say, with the Nasscom Foundation, Social Alpha, and others around this. And the last piece is, and building on, I think what Ankita said, the value of death and the long tail, right? Really of 80, there's a long tail and there's limited scalability. So matchmaking and these kinds of things becomes really important, so that you're able to sort of aggregate demand and you're able to have a very clear path to scale, which then makes the product or the service investable for investors, right? So there's some early stage discussions we're having with a bunch of partners, including the Zero project team in Austria, around how do you systematically scale up such matchmaking so that IP, that's assistive technology IP and solutions, can actually get embedded in, let's say, IP licensing mechanisms that governments have or large companies have, where they're looking to build their product portfolio. So that's the third very fairly tangible opportunity.
Thank you.
Back to you, Shashaank.
Yeah, thanks so much. Utsav, do you want to tell us a little bit about what Inclusion 20 could look like? And then, the discussion is almost always around cities, right? But what happens to towns, villages, connectivity, etc., because that's where most of our people with disabilities live.
Yeah. Thanks, Shashaank. See, as is always the case, it's a problem of scale, right? So it works both ways. We are a country where every small problem is a problem of at least 1 million people, and penetration often becomes an issue. So I think inclusion 20 should be about penetration, right? So penetration in two ways. Let's celebrate what we are good at, and let's identify opportunities where we need to improve. There are quite a few demonstrated examples of inclusion across the length and breadth of the country, whether we talk about public infrastructure investments, or we're talking about spaces, or we're talking about architectural interventions across the city, or policy and governance related interventions. There are really good examples. Chennai has a lot of good examples. The beach accessibility front. Bhubaneswar and Odisha does an excellent job of incorporating transgender and persons with disability into the WASH economy. We are talking about Jaipur, and we have other cities in Rajasthan who are doing an excellent job of bringing up the artisanal economy from gender and disability perspective through Hriday and other programs. So there's a lot that we're good at. It's just that we don't necessarily hear from all of us, and we don't celebrate it. So that's one of the biggest issues that India has. We don't necessarily are good storytellers. We need to tell our stories well, and we need to tell them loud to the world that this is what we are doing. And I think with Nirat and with Nidhi and Ankita and Arman, who have been doing pioneering work, and including you, Shashaank, as well, all the great work that the country is doing. And I'm so very glad that some of us are there in person. So I'd love for you to sort of network for all of us and talk about the excellent work that India is doing as far as inclusion and accessibility is concerned, and also bring something back together. And Inclusion 20 is not just about us, but it's also about what the world is doing, right? So there are great examples from across the world that India could adopt, both from a technological and from a policy standpoint. So we have been harping on the smart cities concept for the longest time. We have 100 of them, right? So have we considered, and this is again a question directed towards Nirat, Nidhi, and Ankita, are we looking at cities as a market for assistive technologies? We are constantly talking about individuals being the buyers. Let's talk about government being the buyer. One who is loss averse, and one that is confident enough to push technologies, not just from an individual perspective, but from a systemic standpoint. And we get that going in some direction. And as far as opportunities are concerned, Shashaank, I think what we collectively need to do, both from an intelligence point of view and from a knowledge point of view, is to capacitate cities. I mean, the more and more you penetrate, you talk about towns and cities and tier 1, tier 2 cities and tier 3 cities, the level of difference in knowledge and understanding of what inclusion is stark. You go to a tier 2, tier 3 city, just a simple ramp seems to be more than out of their sort of mandates that they have done. And you go to a city, no city is perfect, but if you go to a city like Bhubaneswar, or if you go to a city like Delhi or Chennai, they are setting different kind of standards for themselves. And that is more to do with the commitment. So it starts with intent, but information enables you to do so much more. And that is what we are trying to focus on. So with the harmonized guidelines being revised, with the inclusive cities framework that we have developed, the MoMA has also developed something called an Able India framework. So it's one of the first frameworks in the world that focuses on public buildings, and it has a gradation system that then works for and against the urban local bodies who are developing those. So lots to take away and lots to do, and I think Inclusion 20 should be celebrating the good and also pointing out what needs to be done in the future. So that's just my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Utsav. I don't know if I've come across as very pessimistic in my attempts to be provocative, so I'm going to be a bit of a turncoat now, and I want to tell you that there's something common in a place called Achrapakam, another place called Cheliur, and a third place called Jhansi, and they are in different parts of the country. And why do I bring up those 3 names? Because I've had the privilege of going and conducting an access audit in each of these. So just in the single state of Tamil Nadu, the government has decided it wants to do an access audit of 1,000 places. These are places of tourist interest. These are government offices. So I think this, change is afoot. There's no doubt about that. And now I'm going to make this super controversial. And I'm going to say that in 20 years from now, there is no way that Arman and I are wanting to have dinner somewhere where we are unable to go unassisted, right? I think it's going to be that. I think we're going to demonstrate the singularly biggest change in removing barriers at such scale, right? it's, I mean, and in some other conversation, we talked about this immense despondency and yet the exuberance that all of us face in the course of our work, right? But I don't think we realize what a change we are in the middle of. So I think I can say that we're all energized by the change that's taking place, whether in the government, public, private, as well as joint sector. Arman, I'm going to come to you. I want you to tell us a little bit about data, right? Because if you're not counted, then you don't count, right? I want you to then, of course, talk a little bit about the seat at the table, because I'm not fully convinced that even in our efforts, we are removing barriers enough, right? And then your closing comment on my claim that 20 years out, you and I can both have dinner without any need for having to think about barriers.
Shashaank, I will deviate also a bit, because a lot has been said and it's very encouraging. And, you know, I must put it on record, you know, I take pride in my friendship and the work that Nidhi is doing, Ankita, you know, Utsav, all of them are fantastic, you know, and I take advantage of being friends with them and pull them up on and off in public space. So great efforts, and I think without the IT, the scores around employment of people with disability in private sector would not have happened. So we must put that on record. There are challenges everywhere, and investment, you know, I will come to investment. When you, how does it work? Like, what is the investment on disability? What is the struggle of a person with disability? And I will change your question, you know, 20 years from now, I really don't want to go to dinner with you anywhere. and the struggle is, Shashaank, is to, you know, a student with disability get out of their house, get into the school bus, go to a school, get education, come, get employment, independently go to his place of work, get a salary, has a family, goes to the bar, get drunk, arrested, go to the jail, come out. That's what I want to see. It's not about, you know, I come from a well-to-do background, you know, I can afford, I have friends, you know, and we can find a 5-star hotel where we will be able to go. But we need to be cognizant of the elephant in the room. We need to address, education is a fundamental right in our country. The national education policy talks about use of technology and from early childhood development to higher education. So how can we use technology to ensure that no one is left behind? And they are seen how disabled people can make friends, how they're in schools, colleges, you know, have a lifespan approach on disability. Zero investment. So what is the struggle of a person with disability is to fight for a social security. Social security is in terms of pension. I don't know, I have a weak maths, 200 rupees, how many dollars is that? I mean, $2.50, and in certain state you get, you know, $100 or so. What do you get out of that money? So now Utsav talked about cities, you know, if you look about accessibility, that's the return of investment. So if you, we need all approaches towards disability. You know, one is that direct benefit transfer, where you are sending money to disabled people every month because under Social Security. Come out on a cost of disability. What is the cost of disability when you live in an inaccessible environment? And then you come out with a formula, and then make investment in making all spaces accessible for people with disability so that they can go work and contribute to the economy and be part of the system. So I think it's a return of investment is something which we need to look at in times to come. And until such you know, a time comes, how do we continue with you know, supporting people with disability? So you talked about you know, seat on the table. Like, you know, seat on the table when you invest on disability, when you build capacity of persons with disability. Now, we started the movement of disability in saying nothing about us without us. Today, we say nothing without us. Irrespective if you are talking about disability or not talking about disability, you must have a person with disability and have a seat on a table to put his or her views. I, as a person with disability, I have views on the budget, I have views on who's got Oscar, I have a view on what kind of you know, everything in the around I have an opinion about. And if you only want to come and talk to me on the kind of wheelchair I need, please back off, you know. And this is I think has to be very, very clear to everyone. You know, what are we talking about, Shashaank? You cannot get an insurance for person with disability. You cannot get your wheelchair insured. You know, you can buy a mobile phone of 10,000 rupees, you get an insurance. But my wheelchair, which I get import from Germany, is 5 lakh rupees. You never know, from a next flight from here to Dubai tonight, I may have something happening to my wheelchair. What happens to that? So let's acknowledge it. You know, Social Alpha, I feel I'm part of Social Alpha sometimes. I have so much of interactions with them when they started it. You know, we've been running this Universal Design Award from 13 years, you know, and you know, so many innovations, all in silos, you know, everybody is trying to compete with the other one. I mean, how do we, you know, there's Nidhi talked about, you know, coming together. I think this is, to have a seat on a table, you need to bring people together. There is no knowledge transfer. There is no awareness amongst people. I mean, I have not seen one campaign on persons with disability in our country which talks about disability as a lifespan. You know, you're not putting one person on a wheelchair when there's elections, one person on a wheelchair when you say Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan, and then during the COVID times and so on. That's not the idea. Beti bachao, beti padhao, school chale hum, ghanti bajao, and so many things are happening, and this needs a wide you know, awareness campaign that people know. And I would not have to say, you know, that I have a problem with my leg, otherwise I'm fine. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's sad when I hear, you know, and very often I hear from people with disability looking for jobs that I have an issue with my leg, but I can walk. Who says that? Will you say that when it comes to gender, that I'm a woman, but, you know, you can treat me like a man? I mean, and so on. So I have a lot to say, Shashaank, as you always, but thank you so much for this. I remember this, ek sher yaad aa gaya in Hindi, I would say, from Ram Prasad Bismil. Part of it says, कि करता नहीं क्यों दूसरा कुछ बातचीत, देखता हूँ मैं जिसे वो चुप तेरी महफिल में है. So with this, I will end it here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We're out of time, and really appreciate your time. Thank you. Goodbye.